So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and for you, you may not have noticed it, but it's actually been a while since I last recorded because of a work trip, so it's been over 3 weeks actually since I last got the opportunity to record. And it's rather interesting because for me also, it's been quite a large gap since the last dwarven settlement, but for you, it will not be such a large gap, I don't think, because KIRIKGATHOL was rather recent, at least in terms of being uploaded to YouTube, and this is KIRIKGATHOL, this one made by Morris as opposed to Eclipse, but this once again is also going to be making a liberal use of the new dwarven assets, new statues here at the front, these walkways which we also saw in Eclipse's version of the map, and this, which are some rather nice dwarven statues as well. This, it must be said, is a little bit more of a winding settlement by the looks of things, and also the defenders have got a little bit more ground to cover, a little bit more open ground within the settlement, which may work against them. But having said that, there are also some rather nasty looking points in the settlement as well they could really use to their advantage. Last time we saw Khazad-Dum take on some orcs and some goblins. We shall see now if their cousins from Erebor can fare just as well against the evil men of the East. Must be honest as well, the evil men of the East are pretty well set up for fighting against the dwarves with their armour piercing, but the dwarves of course still will have the edge in terms of their overall quality. So we shall see. Rather impressive and imposing looking settlement, lots of vegetation within its walls as well, so that is also something which sets it apart from KIRIKGATHOL. A little bit more vegetation within the Iron Hills here. So, we shall go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting with Asa 255X playing as one of the runic forces. Gamprim will be very, very useful as the battle goes along, although I would suggest that they would probably be better off being saved until a little bit later. Otherwise, Erebor, especially with how quickly their crossbows will be able to kill off units such as this, the Gamprim will really struggle. But later on, a halberdier like this could be exactly the sort of thing which puts the battle beyond Erebor if they overcommit early. We shall have to wait and see on that score. More Gamprim along the front here as well. Naturally, Rune are going to have to make do with some of their lower end units. The Eastron clansmen with just one level of armour upgrade, kind of a rare sight. You either see them with none at all or with the golden armour upgrade, which really sets them apart from other sword and board militia. They're decent as far as a unit like this goes, but they will find themselves, of course, vastly outperformed by the quality that Erebor will be able to bring to bear in melee. This, of course, is the fully upgraded variant of the Eastron clansmen, so they'll be a little bit more durable, but they still will struggle against the really elite dwarven units. The Scion Rim, the Locust Scion Rim, very good defensive spear unit, very capable of withstanding quite a lot of punishment. Not going to be all that capable of dishing out a great amount of damage to the heavier dwarven units, though they are somewhat unique in the fact that they are very defensive and they don't have access to the armour piercing that the other Loki units do. But that anchor to their line is going to be quite necessary here, I think, because quite a lot of the other runic units will lack the melee defense and armour combination that will be necessary to really go toe-to-toe with the dwarves over a longer period of time, which is how the attackers will try and win this, I imagine, by overwhelming the defenders, as a 5v3 will usually be. Scion Rim here. The Cummels chosen, of course, the bodyguard unit. Again, they're not going to be able to hold a candle to the equivalent sword and board bodyguards that the dwarves will be able to bring, but even so, they're still a very strong unit, and they will be a very effective unit as well at this core of numerous runic horde. We've also got some Flagrim, Mace line infantry, well, Axe and Mace line infantry. The armour piercing will really be useful if they can get into melee and stay there. Balkoth tribesmen, a bit more armour piercing, this time at range. Crossbows will likely try and target them down. The armour upgrade will help, but to be fair, like, crossbows will punch right through that armour upgrade, and it's not going to help them enough in melee for them to be terribly effective there. And then also some Eastron crossbows, of course, Rune not lacking in that department as well. Then we have Mr. Sneakman playing as Canned. Nurad Halberds, much the same thing here as with the Gamprim. If they can be saved until later in the battle, they could prove to be a real difference maker. If not, however, I would imagine the dwarven players will try to target units like this down, because deprive the enemy of a phalanx and it becomes all about that quality in melee, in choke points, and that's exactly where the dwarves are going to win, regardless of the armour piercing that the attackers may bring. Nomadic Marauders, quite similar to the Balkoth tribesmen as well, albeit a little bit more of a rabble, a little bit more disorganised. The Nurad Footmen, once again, very similar to the Flagrim in front of them, but they sacrifice a little bit in terms of armour, but gain a bit in terms of shield value. That being said, Its shield value against Erebor is not the most useful thing because of their sort of entire dependence on crossbows at range, which will punch right on through the likes of armour and shield value anyway, so for the purposes of this they're very much the same kind of unit. Nomadic infantry are also over here, which is an archer combined with a decent melee combatant. They'll be able to offer a little bit in melee, but they will still struggle against the dwarven quality. This is the kind of unit that will be really, really useful later on. We've got some Brotherhood of the Axe over here. Plenty of Brotherhood units, in fact, more Brotherhood of the Axe, Brotherhood of the Sword, Spear, some Nomadic Axemen and Warriors, which are a lower end unit, of course, Stormguard and Windblades. I'll be really interested to see if the Windblades can actually be effective in this battle. We shall have to wait and see. If they can get in and amongst the more open areas of the settlement, perhaps they will. Then we have Mevin playing as Rune. He's got some Scion Rim again. He's got some unupgraded Balcoth the Tribesman, some crossbows, some flag rim. I imagine it's going to be very much the same sort of thing. Decent amount of quality that Rune are bringing to bear as well with all of the armour piercing, but they will still need to be reliant on those numbers. But having said that, the attackers start with a natural sort of advantage in these battles anyway. Not that that saved them at KIRIKGATHOL. Balcoth Tribesman, Scion Rim. We've got some Eastron crossbows, a couple of them over here. If they can be saved till later on as well, exactly the sort of thing which could be really, really handy. But not a great deal of long-range stuff that Rune have available to them, so they may be forced to go all in quite early, which may play into Erebor's hands. And some more Cummels chosen here at the back. So those are 3 armies, and then a couple more armies going to be heading around to the western part of the map over here. Froggy playing as a Candish army, more Brotherhood of the Axe and Spear, really good higher end units that can have. Nomadic Marauders, some more Nurad Footmen, and Halberdiers, nice armor piercing combination once again. Nomadic Warriors and more Nurad Halberds, Nomadic Axemen once again, just to get a zoom in on them as well. Lower end Axemen, very much the same sort of thing that the Orcs will bring very often. Yes, they're armor piercing, but they're very, very fragile, so can they actually stay alive long enough to deliver that armor piercing damage onto the dwarves? We shall have to wait and see. More Brotherhood of the Sword and Axe. I mean, I have to say, Can's got plenty of Brotherhood units. We shall see how Erebor deign to deal with them. And finally, we've got WK on the attack as well. Some Balcoth Tribesmen over here, and some Gamp Rim backing them up. Some Eastron Clansmen, looks like they all have the armour upgrade, so interesting mishmash, I should say, of armour upgrades and the level of which that the attackers have. Flag Rim are here, got some Eastron Crossbowmen, Scion Rim, Dragon's Wrath Crossbowmen. They could of course be brutally effective, but Erebor of course have got their own answer to that, which I'm sure we shall be seeing on the defence, numerous examples of. Carmel's chosen. Actually, we do have a Dragon's Breath flame cannon as well, so we'll see how useful that can be if they can take up a good position within the settlement. If the attackers can take a good position from the defenders, this could be really, really useful. If not, however, WK may struggle to get full effectiveness from it. Now we shall move on to the stout-hearted Dwarven defenders. Nothing in this gap over here, but there will be... Aha, here we go. I knew they would be somewhere. Morris himself, the creator of the scenario, Iron for Axe Throwers, could be really, really good at dealing with those Phalanx units that both Cand and Rune are bringing to the table. Erebor Legionaries are in here as well as Ironfoot Warriors. The Ironfoot Warriors themselves are really good functional line infantry, and they will be... I mean, to be fair, the armour piercing makes it quite an even fight, I would say, between them and the rank and file Runic and Candish units, but the Erebor Legionaries are a cut above, so we shall see them do their thing, I'm sure. Ironfoot Halberds, armour piercing Phalanx once again, this time for the defenders though. We also have some Ironfoot Hammerguard from Tundra's Fox. Interesting to see if they can sally forth. They'll need to be careful of the Windblades that are out and about, because they can easily catch up to the Hammerguard, and melee cavalry could be a bit of a problem for them, but if they can charge into the attackers as they make their way up this heavily forested path, that could be the sort of thing that the attackers lose track of. And losing track of cavalry in such a situation can be really, really deadly. Ironfoot axe throwers up here on the high ground, as well as some Ironfoot crossbows, so axe throwers and crossbows galore. This, I would have to say, is how Erebor are probably going to have to win this fight, picking good targets with their ranged units and really punishing the attackers for having to move in quickly. Yes, their infantry is very strong, but they're not going to be able to withstand the sheer numbers the attackers are bringing to the table forever. So target selection is going to be critical here. Erebor Legionaries, plenty of them, which the quality is going to be very necessary. Ironfoot Spears to offer a little bit of mass to the front line. spears with their more defensive nature. Axe Guard of Erebor, very good armor-piercing shock infantry. The armor-piercing will be useful. Rune and Canned. Rune... yeah, they've got around the same armor level, to be fair, which is not... they're not overly dependent on their armor in the way that the Western Kingdoms of Men are, but it's still there to the point where this sort of unit is going to be effective, mainly because of the sheer quality that they bring. Highborns of Erebor as well, a very good bodyguard tier unit. This is where the dwarves can really flex their muscles against the Eastern men. Their bodyguard units are going to be far superior. More iron for halberdiers back here as well. We've also got some Erebor legionaries. A little further back we've also got some more Axe Guard, a unit of Dragon Slayers as well, an armor piercing bodyguard unit. Really, really strong. And then over here on this side we've got some crossbows, a catapult which has already taken up a pretty nasty position. You can see that that could be where the battle turns against them. You can see the dwarven abodes here at the back, but you can actually enter that part of the battlefield. Then we've got Morris's main army. He's got some axe throwers, he's got some legionaries, he's got some Ironfoot spears as well. Axe Guard of Erebor. A little further back we've got some Ironfoot halberdiers, Erebor legionaries, Ironfoot spears, Erebor legion, Dragon Slayers, Obsidian Guard, Ironfoot halberds. The Obsidian Guard, first example of them, we've seen a dual wielding unit. Kind of interesting, very high melee defense in addition to the armor, so in terms of melee they're an exceptional unit defensively, but they're an interesting one. They're probably my least favourite of the Erebor bodyguard, but then dual wielding is kind of a difficult thing to make effective. And then finally we have DF Josh, who has got a couple of units of Ironfoot spears, a few units of Ironfoot halberdiers as well, plenty of Axe Guard of Erebor on display, so tons of armor piercing being employed by both sides. Ironfoot crossbows, we've also got some Ironfoot axe throwers over here who aren't armor piercing but huge base damage. Erebor legionaries, going to be very difficult to break down this much in terms of defensive quality. I'm pleased to see that the defenders do have the significant edge in terms of quality, even if the attackers are bringing a fair amount of their own as well. Sons of Durin, a bodyguard tier shock infantry unit with armor piercing, Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers and Highborns, so plenty of bodyguard units there, and a catapult, and I think that is pretty much it. I did notice earlier on there were Blacklocks before we moved. I think this might be them over here, lest I miss them. Yes, here they are, Blacklock Engineers, which of course very similar to the Dragon's Wrath Crossmen, a crossbow unit with body piercing, which naturally is a very terrifying thing. So it's going to take the attackers a little while to march into place. I think that forested path over there is probably where we're going to rejoin the action, but regardless, I'll make a little bit of a cut and we'll rejoin when the first engagements are happening. Doesn't look like we're going to have to wait long either, as the Ironfoot Hammer Guard charge into the nomadic axemen that were coming up the hill from Froggy. The halberdiers lagging a little bit further behind, they were deployed a little bit further back, so this really was kind of an unavoidable situation. It was either lose some nomadic axemen or lose some of the perhaps more important nomadic infantry, the Nurad footmen, also coming forward. They do need to be a little bit careful here, the Ironfoot Hammer Guard, because if they do get bogged down in and amongst all this armour piercing, they will take a little bit of damage. But charging in and out of the Candish infantry such as this is certainly not a bad idea, and they could even get a pretty decent amount of damage done to these Nurad footmen as they try to form up. And no doubt Froggy will be trying to get some halberdiers on this front line to prevent the Hammer Guard from continuing to bully the first waves of Candish nomads. Charging in once again. The Nurads and the nomads taking yet more damage, but the time of plenty for the Ironfoot Hammer Guard in terms of getting their kills is going to be at an end as the halberdiers push to the front line. You really don't want to be charging into the front of braced halberds if you can help it, but still, some good initial charges taken there by Tundra's Fox. You can see here that the dwarves already in a pretty nasty defensive position, some good fortifications either side. Do they have some ranged units? They do have some axe throwers, I suppose, but they don't have any crossbows over here. So the ranged advantage, even though they're on the lower ground, will belong to Canned, especially with their archers in tow. And they're just going to have to try and sit there and take it. Hope that their armour and their shields that are covering these halberdiers that are there also going to be enough to absorb a lot of damage. But to be fair, the dwarves are going to be very good at this sort of thing. Taking punishment such as that is definitely their forte. Meanwhile, we're going to be seeing one of the runic armies going this way. Quite a long way before they can actually get into a position where they can attack DF Josh's position, which is a little bit further back within the Iron Hills. They're going through the middle here, it will take them quite a while as well, the attackers, to get to the point where they're attacking the main body of Morris's army as well. It's quite a long way before another runic army is able to get there. So for the time being, Froggy's probing over on this front line is going to be the only thing that we actually see in terms of action in the battle. Nice little position here that he's taken up with his nomadic infantry, seizing some higher ground, getting a little bit more range, but range isn't really going to be the problem if Erebor aren't pushing their crossbows forward. These archers are always going to be able to outrange axe throwers. The problem is going to be more along the lines of actually being able to do substantial amounts of damage with units such as that. You can see as the Ironfoot warriors turned around and the shields were not pointing in the right direction, they did do a little bit more damage, but this is a bit of a conundrum here for the dwarves. Do they sit here and try and absorb all this punishment, or do they move back? Ironfoot warriors do have the armour upgrade as well, which will make them just that little bit more resilient. Now, doubtless they'll be also a little bit more concerned about the Ironfoot halberds in this particular situation. Unfortunately for them, it does seem to be the shielded units that are taking the vast majority of that punishment. Another runic army leading the way over here as well, so I would assume, yes indeed, Mr. Sneakman's Candish force is going to be the backup to Rune over on these two fronts, you would imagine. But it is going to be a bit of a slow burn here early on. It's not the sort of thing where I would want to make any sort of cut, because I believe we could see, well, looks like the nomadic infantry have actually stopped firing. So I think actually I will make a bit of a cut, and we'll rejoin when the battle is actually beginning in earnest. So I think we'll rejoin here once again with the forces of evil starting to encroach on some of the deeper parts of the settlement, with the Ironfoot crossbows starting to open up on the runic forces as they come over this hill. The strong clansmen going to be leading the way, unsurprisingly. They're not going to mind too much rune if crossbow bolts are used on such relatively lowly troops. And there was the sound of the dragon's breath, was it not? The dull thud of the runic artillery. Where is it? Where is that cannon? It can't be over here then. Has he moved it in support of... Yes, he has. He has moved it in support of Froggy's Candish force. And they're going to be trying to move back as Tundra's Fox has also moved backwards a little bit to try and take advantage perhaps of some of these narrow bits of terrain. Some more death there inflicted presumably by the runic artillery. See over here as well, nomadic marauders planning on moving forwards but immediately being pushed back by the Ironfoot spears, so trying to skirmish down the enemy front lines with some armour-piercing javelins. The Ironfoot spears chasing them off. They don't want to get entangled with the Scion Rim though, if they can help it. We're going to see, yes, a bit of a melee engagement here. The first large-scale melee engagement we see on the battlefield, and it's actually in the Erebor players' territory that was the furthest back, which is kind of interesting. DF Josh being engaged by all these strong clansmen, but the runic player here is making one of those errors that I do talk about quite a lot, where he's sent forward all of these lower end troops but with no genuine quality behind them. The dwarves aren't really going to be put in too much peril by this. It is only Ironfoot, so these strong clansmen will at least get some kills, but they aren't going to be able to get enough to make this worth it. This is going to be a great deal of runic manpower that is effectively going to go down the drain. The Ironfoot halberds will brace the line, and the Ironfoot spears will make sure that they can simply push through with sheer mass. So yeah, not ideal for Rune this. They're going to need to get some better support forwards. There are some strong crossbows which could be really useful, but I'm sure that if Erebor sees them, that'll be exactly the sort of thing which they try to focus down. Mr. Sneakman is going to move forward to try and support Rune a little bit. Rune going the long way around, and you can see here that these strong clansmen, well, not these strong clansmen, the nomadic axemen moving forward first, but this is a huge blob of Candish troops which is also being attacked by the Ironfoot crossbows that are up on the high ground there. Plenty of kills that could be inflicted here on the Candish force as they move forward in one great big blob. Would actually be the perfect target for the Blacklock engineers, but they aren't going to be able to get into position quickly enough, I don't think. Ironfoot warriors still waiting for Froggy to move forward. Erebor legionaries are also in position, and then the final attacking force, WK's army, is still not ready to move in completely yet, but once again this is one of those positions where Erebor have got their skirmishers in a really nice area, so you can understand the reluctance of the attackers to simply move forward extremely quickly. Meanwhile, we do have some nomadic axemen moving to the front line now as well. A little bit of armour piercing certainly wouldn't go amiss. And here goes the Erebor catapult. Not entirely sure that's the best target for them. If you're going to go after these strong crossbows, use your own crossbows on them. They're too spread out for the catapult to be really useful in that situation. If it was this blob you were firing at, then by all means, fill your boots. But it's not. You can see here the dwarves actually starting to struggle a little bit under the sheer weight of numbers that the evil men are starting to apply to the front line. So more Ironfoot spears are going to be sent forward to try and shore things up, and they will succeed in that endeavour. Nomadic warriors are going to try and push through, and they will succeed as well. A gap has been found. Basic line infantry though they may be, when this sort of thing starts to happen, I'll be really interested to see if the dwarven player starts to panic in this situation. Many times you see a player start to panic and they start to make highly questionable decisions. The Erebor legionaries should be able to force the nomadic warriors to rout fairly fast. Yeah, you can see they're already shaken, being put under a lot of stresses and strains, but if some Nurads are able to get forward, that would be much more difficult for the dwarves to try and deal with. Nomadic infantry getting up there, E-strong crossbows, so plenty of ranged support as well. So things are going pretty decently for the attackers here. They've definitely set the table nicely. I think the Ironfoot axe throwers should probably start firing at some stage soon. Erebor can definitely turn this around fairly simply, but we'll have to wait and see what they decide to do there. Balkoth tribesmen firing away. There is actually a melee engagement happening over here as well. It's a very complicated settlement, so just looking at the minimap isn't really enough to really glean what's going on fully, as Mevin has sent forward some Gamprim and some Flagrim, so a decent armour-piercing combination there into these Ironfoots. The Erebor legionaries are here as well though, so the dwarves getting in the way of Mevin's advance. Some halberds ready to support as well, but it's the Ironfoot crossbows that are really going to be the main source of trouble. They're going after the Scion Rim, interestingly enough. Still, plenty of kills to be had. And then over here, we're starting to see Rune get ever closer to Tundra's Fox's front line. Yeah, they're using those javelins still. This is something which all of the attackers have been very eager to do thus far. Very unsurprising that that's the path they've decided to try and take as well. Try and soften the dwarves up with some of their armor-piercing projectiles before moving in. Otherwise the dwarven front line's notoriously very, very hard to break down through sheer strength of arms alone. Meanwhile, this rather narrow approach here, Froggy should be able to make it through though. I think Morris, there's not really enough dwarves over here to stop a full-blooded Candish attack, and unfortunately for the dwarves that is exactly what we're seeing at the moment. Not enough on the front line from them to really take full advantage of that. As you can see, the Dragon's Breath cannon shot flying overhead. Some more Ironfoot warriors arriving on the front line now to try and bring this Candish attack to heel. But I think Froggy will be quite pleased with how things are going there. Let's go back over here though. This could very well be the attacker's best chance at moving forward quickly, but there is a lot of routing going on now, I should say, and that could be down to the catapult more than anything else. A close range hit from them can send a lot of these troops routing, and Cand and Rune, I think Cand in particular have got slightly lower morale, so routing is definitely a tool that the dwarves can use to really good effect. The Dragon Slayers are pushing forward as well, which is going to be bad news even for the stronger troops that the attackers are pushing forwards, but lots of ranged attacks coming forward from both sides. Balkoth tribesmen firing their javelins in. If they're going after the Dragon Slayer, that's an ideal target. You need to soften them up somehow, because they are such a strong combatant, and they are going to be a real problem here as they push further forwards into Cand and Rune, but they will need a little bit more support as well. DF Josh can't afford to be too stingy with this. If he's sending forward his Dragon Slayers, then he needs to support them properly, otherwise they will be overwhelmed by the sheer amount of infantry that Rune and Cand can push forward. Javelins, crossbow bolts and arrows continue to fly overhead. And there are plenty of basic dwarven troops on this side of the line as well. Lots of Ironfoots, a few Erebor legionaries in there as well. You can see the different shields denoting the two levels of units. Highborns of Erebor moving forward from DF Morris. They're trying to push back once again against the javelins. This particular road through the settlement is more of a game of cat and mouse than anything, with all of the attackers trying to use their javelins to pepper down the dwarves first and foremost before moving forwards. Elsewhere, a little bit more forthrightly attacks, although they have had to ease off a little bit over here. More so because of the presence of the crossbows and the fact that the dwarven infantry was of pretty high quality, even though Rune was sending forward some of their better units. Wasn't going all that well for them. They're going to try and use their crossbows now to presumably soften up some of the units that are over there. Going after the Erebor legionaries. Some good hits. It'll be interesting to see how Morris reacts to that. Again, another large-scale assault over here. This one unit of Erebor legionaries actually getting largely surrounded by WK there, but these strong clansmen are going to have to turn around to meet the advance of the Axe Guard of Erebor, and clearly this is going to be a fight which favours one side over the other. Moving over to this side as well, we can see some Balkoth tribesmen in melee with the Erebor legionaries, so some good quality Erebor units here. So while positionally Rune will be quite happy with this, their troops aren't going to be strong enough to hold this position that they've gained without some more support coming forward. But Flagrim are on the way now, so they should be able to consolidate their gains. It's a little bit messy, this defence over here from Erebor. They might need some support from their ranged units on the higher ground. The Dwarves continuing to hold over here. The benefit of having a narrower choke point in comparison to some of the other battles that have been springing up around the field. And with the Ironfoot halberds as well, as much as Froggy would have been quite happy with how this fight was going initially, now it's going to be a much more long-winded affair that he's going to have to put up with. He has his own halberds, of course, but it's not really the sort of position where you can get some good ranged support into play either. So the Dwarves will be able to hold here for quite some time. Eventually, I think the numbers will tell, but as long as it's an efficient engagement for the Dwarves, they will be pretty happy to take that, I think. Meanwhile, there is actually some melee fighting going on over here. Ironfoot spears and Highborns of Erebor. Scion Rim find themselves outmatched by the Highborns. The Javelins are not really in a sort of position where they can easily hit their foe, although that now they will be as the Dwarves try to pull back. Good opportunity to pin them in the back with a few volleys. Will they succeed? Doesn't look like a full volley there. Looks a bit sporadic as well, unfortunately for them. Meanwhile, Erebor legionaries moving forward. Not going to allow the Eastron crossbowmen to have things all their own way. Yeah, Gamprim, Flagrim, and it's a lot of armour piercing. The Erebor legionaries will take damage against this kind of foe over time. And again, positionally it's a little bit suspect. It's the sort of thing that the attackers can take advantage of potentially. We shall have to wait and see. Over here, meanwhile, definitely the bloodiest part of the battlefield so far. I think more so because the attackers have been really willing to just throw things forward in great numbers over here, more so than anywhere else. And that in turn has meant that the Dwarves have had to answer with some force of their own. Axe Guard of Erebor, who are shaken. It takes quite a lot to shake up higher tier dwarven units. Erebor not quite as high morale as their neighbours in Khazad-Dum, or brethren I should say, more so than neighbours, but even so, it's not as if their morale is poor, and they're continuing to fight here on the front line, but the sheer amount of troops they're having to deal with, and a lot of these units as well are of exactly the kind of type which are going to be good against the Dwarves in a long fight like this. All the armour piercing from Rune, a bit of armour piercing from Cand as well, some Brotherhood of the Spear to add a little bit more solidity to the front line. Scion Rim as well, so again, Cand and Rune, very similar with regards to what they offer. Plenty of tools that can be useful against Dwarves. Iron for axe throwers, outer ammunition, getting into melee, just adding more bulk to the front line. But it's not looking great this for the Dwarves because there's still quite a lot of strength in reserve here for Rune and Cand. It's not as if they've been able to make their gains here free of charge. They've definitely taken a lot of losses, but if the fight continues in this vein, the Dwarves will falter before they do. And that's all they really need to do. If they can push further into the settlement from this side, it'll start to make the Dwarves' job significantly more difficult. The Nurad Windblades have also managed to make it into the settlement. I'm not sure how they've managed to make it all the way back here, but very fast moving. They're going after the Blacklocks as well, I would assume, trying to take out one of the most dangerous tools that there are on the field.
Only half the enemy force
I don't know how Mr. Sneakman managed this, but the fact that he has is going to make life very difficult for the defenders over here, because now not only are they starting to look a little bit ropey on the front line there, but now they've got to deal with this annoyance in the backfield as well. So really, really good work from Cand and Rune over on this side. They killed off a good chunk of those Blacklock engineers as well. Now they're going to go into the Highborns of Erebor. They are primarily melee cavalry, the Windblades, but they're so fast, and they are ultimately a bodyguard tier cavalry as well, that if you can cycle charge around the field like this, you will be able to do a lot of damage. The Highborns there, though, from the front, withstanding the charge much better than the Blackbuck Engineers did when they were showing the enemy their back. It'll be interesting to see if this happens again. Highborns now showing their back to the Windblades. Ooh, and they decide to pull out as the Highborns turn around. Worth bearing that in mind, though, as the battle continues. This fight continuing in this way. Meanwhile, over here, again, the slightly messy front line doesn't appear to be paying all that many dividends. Carmel's Chosen here, who have also managed to make it all the way into the backfield over here. Carmel's Shadow Guard, once again, a messy engagement, and that's not what the Dwarves want. The Dwarves want regimented, they want organised. That's how they win this fight. If things get chaotic, as it appears they are doing, particularly on the two flanking engagements, that can only favour the attackers, you would imagine. Carmel's Chosen this far in, going after Ironfoot crossbows who are exposed. Carmel's Shadow Guard who are going up against the Ironfoot halberds. If the halberds can organise themselves, their phalanx should be enough to win them that fight, but they aren't at the moment. Can Tundra turn this around? I mean, his front line has fallen, to be honest, or is in the process of falling. There's not that many of them remaining. Again, losses have been sustained by the attackers, but not enough, I would say, for the Dwarves to be all that happy with how that engagement has gone. Speaking of which, over here, yeah, again, you can see more force being applied. I think the Dwarves, one of the things that so far has been a bit of a theme among all of the Dwarven defenders is they haven't committed enough to their initial defences for them to be truly effective. And when the attackers have decided enough is enough and we're going to commit forward a lot of our strength, the Dwarven defence has been found wanting so far, which is a bad sign for them. There's still some iron for axe throwers. In the middle, how are things going in the middle? Well, you can see actually already the Dwarves are looking to pull back, and that is not too surprising given how this has gone so far. I mean, they're actually doing okay here in the middle, but they can't afford to stay here if their flanks are going to be exposed at some point, with the two sides starting to falter a little bit. DF Josh taking perhaps a different approach and is instead going to send forward more units to the front to try and continue to hold on. Iron for axe throwers out of ammunition, nomadic infantry offering some support.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Surely that would be... Eastron Guard, missed them in the composition phase with the armour upgrade. The Glaive Infantry, kind of an interesting little unit, maybe not effective per se, but interesting nonetheless. Iron for halberds. Brotherhood of the Spear, just nomadic axemen, a bit more armour piercing being added. And again, starting to be more and more desperate for the Dwarves, this little defence. Is this the Windblades back here in the heart of the settlement? Yes, it is. They managed to get really right to the back of KIRIKGATHOL. That is a little bit of a concern. I mean, where do the Dwarves go for their final stand would be my question. Is there an obvious position for the final stand? Is it over here, back here in the corner? It's not as if, it's not like Gabilgathol where there was that plinth right at the end, where it was obvious that was where the Dwarves were always going to fight backwards to. But here it's a little bit less clear cut. In many ways, actually, I suppose it is back here, isn't it? We're going to be heading towards the red line fairly soon, I would imagine. There's a lot to this map, isn't there? Lots of hidden little bits and pieces. All the vegetation makes it a little bit more tricky to know where you're going. I mean, this wouldn't be the worst place for a final stand, I suppose, but it does leave you open to being attacked from two sides, if that's how the attackers want to handle their business. Mevin moving forward, taking point here in the middle. Alone in the middle as well as he was, with Mr. Sneakman committing all of his forces to help out with Asar's push over on this side. Speaking of which, though, Rune's side of this attack is starting to falter a little bit. The Dwarves rallying a bit more, getting more damage done. More is going to be needed from both Rune and Cam to finalise their victory over Erebor here. And then over on this side of things, WK will be pretty damn pleased. Froggy as well. Fine for axe throwers are here, but managed to sweep aside the rather chaotic defence was put up over here. I'm sure if the Dwarves had their time again over here, they would change up what they were doing. There's still fighting going on over here, even though Can have pushed their way through this defence already. A few brave Erebor defenders still remain, which Can need to deal with. Now then, what else do we have? Mevin with his army a little bit stretched. Dwarven forces over here on top of this area. Nomadic Marauders going to try and use their javelins, I would presume. Windblades? It's kind of hard to tell where they're going with all of these trees. There they are. Still 30 of them remain. I mean, they're so hard to catch. I mean, the dwarves are... They're going to have to just defend and hope that they can zone out the Windblades, I think. If Mr. Seatman keeps them moving, the dwarves aren't going to be able to catch them. They're slow at the best of times, especially against one of the fastest units of cavalry the game has to offer. Rune moving forwards there. Erebor forming up in another defensive position a little bit further back, but I do believe they're not going to continue to move along the outer edge of the map, and instead they're going to start moving their way towards the middle. There's so many roads through the settlement, though, that it can be a little bit difficult to defend every angle here for the dwarves, and that can be something else that the attackers use to their advantage as the Iron for Axe Throwers rout. Stragglers being picked off here by the advancing Candish and Runic armies. But it is still over here where the dwarves do continue to stand, not for too much longer I would imagine, as Rune, another full wave coming forward now. Still they've got the Candish infantry in close proximity as well. They need to try and do more damage here though, the dwarves. They need something to hold on to going into the late game. And they need to know that some of the attackers have been bled thoroughly before the latter stages get underway. That's a lot of armour piercing. Yeah, Axe Guard of Erebor are routing in close proximity to Shadow Guard and Brotherhood of the Shadows. There's also those Brotherhood of the Spear. Not too many of them remaining. They don't have access to the armour piercing. Many of the other units do, much like the Scion Rim. Again, another similarity that Rune and Can have with one another. Hopping over to this side, some runic crossbows in position. Are they in a good place to shoot? They are in a place where they can see just through the trees some dwarven crossbows. A nice little spot that from them. What do we have here? Catapult? Go after them as well. So yeah, the dwarves are going to have to try and get out of the range of enemy crossbows. Decision has to be made here by Morris as well. He can't afford to just sort of hang around in this low ground. Otherwise, he'll be surrendering a significant advantage to the attackers. Certainly don't want that happening, given all that has occurred so far. Flag Rim moving forwards. Not too much in the way of support from WK though. Only portions of his army are this far advanced. The rest of them are a little bit further back. Froggy also here. Froggy's army is going to have to take its time, maybe a little bit more, to get through the narrow sections. Will the attackers try to reorganise themselves before moving further into the settlement? I would imagine that's probably what they're going to have to try and do, but in order to do that they will need to wait until the final dwarven resistance over here has finally been crushed. This is really the only fight going on the battlefield at this point. Josh's army continues to try and fight, but still a lot of those dwarven units are now shaken. Candish units are starting to get in behind to surround them. I would imagine this is where the routing of these Erebor defenders is going to start. Erebor legionaries are hard to rout, but I think this might be where we start to see such things occur. Halberdiers pushing forward as well. It's all looking pretty grim for the dwarves at this point. But they still have the quality to be able to mount a good defence. I'm not sure what happened to the Blacklock Engineers, whether they were hounded to death by the Windblades. But if they still have them, even a half-strength unit of them, body-piercing crossbow bolts are exactly the sort of thing which can be used to devastating effect if the enemy have to attack into you, such as in this situation. More Shadow Guard. They've still got a catapult as well. Only a couple of volleys of that were used. that's worth mentioning as well. So some dragon slayers here, look. There may be no dragons here today, but I'm sure they'll be hoping to slay the dragon worshippers in Rune. Still, this now, yeah, you can see this is the end. When you see units flooding over your defensive position like that. It's been over in this part of the battlefield for quite a while, but the dwarves actually held out for a little bit longer than I was expecting. Khand and Rune taking their foot off the gas pedal just a little bit, and that did allow the dwarves to hold on for slightly longer, but ultimately the outcome was never in doubt when Khand and Rune really seized the initiative over here, and that is going to allow them to push forward, and this will also allow the attackers to handle business in the way they choose. There's a few routing dwarven units over here, but nothing more, and they are, I think, going to completely avoid this little section that the dwarves have put themselves in. It does look as though Tundra's Fox has chosen his place for a last stand, near this little watchtower over here. But they can't afford to be too disparate here, I don't think, the defenders. They need to be able to fight as one, but that opportunity may have already passed them by, because Tundra's Fox is now going to be cut off from what remains of his two allies. And his two allies are in a slightly awkward position, you would have to say. They're going to have to deal... I mean, they should probably pull back to this part of the map over here. There is this little bridge as well. I would assume this is what is intended to be the final stand. It blends in a little bit thanks to all the vegetation, but that is the only thing that I can think at this moment. Are we starting to see an assault up here? Very, very shortly we will. And it is actually the Carmel's Chosen from Mevin that are leading the way. Clash of the Titans, two bodyguard tier units. The Dragon Slayers do have the beating of the Carmel's Chosen, however. A bit of a tense moment. Two sets of warriors facing one another down. Nothing more at the moment though. Some Flagrim moving forward. Nomadic Marauders going to try and throw a few javelins in. Yeah, and here come the Dragon Slayers now. They're going to close up, not allow the Marauders to get clean shots off. The Dragon Slayers getting in first. They will be immediately backed up by some Ironfoot Halberds and some Ironfoot Warriors. And between these three units, this should be enough to stunt this runic advance for a little while yet. Balance of forces evenly matched. I mean, those Ironfoot Warriors should continue to move forward, really. They might find themselves a little bit exposed to the Nomadic Marauders, but if you're going to commit your Dragon Slayers to a fight, you need to be ready to back them up appropriately. And I would move the Ironfoot Warriors in immediately, to be honest, to start really putting some punishment down onto those runic units. As the slow march begins for Rune and Khand, a little bit more of a beating they have taken compared to their allies in this battle so far. What is this? Enemy bodyguard unit? Arable Legionaries is one of them. How peculiar. I'll have to keep an eye on that. Froggy's army moving forward. His army should still be fairly healthy. He did take a few losses trying to push through that narrow passageway, but ultimately he didn't have to commit his whole army to that, and by the time he did commit a lot of units, the defence was already falling apart. And Rune have pulled back. The Dragon Slayers really doing the business there. Surely did they kill them to the last man? No, 23 Carmel's Chosen though. A little bit of touching up on these stairways is perhaps needed. I think more so on the carpet that has been overlaid on top, but still, Valkoth tribesmen trying to get into point-blank range to use their javelins. That is, it's being quite ambitious to assume the dwarves aren't going to immediately close up and try and kill them off. And in melee, the Dragon Slayers are going to be vastly superior to Valkoth tribesmen. You could still try and use those Nomadic Marauders as well. Perhaps they're simply trying to bait the Dragon Slayers forward a little bit. I mean, they are getting point-blank volleys in, but they are going to be made to pay fairly dearly for that as well. What are they doing here? The dwarves can't afford to just allow these tribesmen to do their thing. Indeed, the Dragon Slayers do double back. Every Dragon Slayer lost is a pretty big deal. They are going to try and close up, get right into the midst of these tribesmen. And they are going to absolutely tear them apart. Look at those numbers plummet. going on here? Nomadic Marauders. Plenty of javelins being utilised. What's going on with all of this as well? Mevin has got like a full army. But I don't think there's anywhere you can truly go this way unless you're going to go right the way around. Try and go up this mountain pathway and go down in this direction, which some of his units are already doing. I'm a little bit surprised to see that. He should definitely be the one to keep up the pressure going through the stairway and allow his allies to flank around, even though it's not the most glamorous of jobs. He'll have to fill the role of largely being cannon fodder. WK moving his runic force in to put a little bit of pressure on Tundra's Fox, who has already got himself nice and comfortable on that high ground. Going to have to rely on that catapult to do quite a lot of damage, but with the Dragon's Breath cannon on the way, that catapult may not be lasting all that much longer. Still some axe throwers in position as well. A little bit too disparate, this defence, I think. There's too many angles for them to cover, and they've already taken a little bit too much in the way of losses for my liking. Crossbow bolts also coming in, so more of these Dragon Slayers starting to fall, being outmanoeuvred once again, you would have to say, the Dwarves. So far, I think the attackers will be very pleased at how this has gone. If they can take advantage of this now, attack the enemy over here from multiple sides and keep Tundra's Fox bottled up, I find it very hard to see how Erebor are going to be victorious in this battle. Using the catapult now, I mean, they really need to be a little bit more patient with the catapult, I think. If the attackers blob up, the catapult is one of the ways in which Erebor can make a comeback. You can't do that, however, if you're wasteful with the catapult and just try and fire into units that are a little bit scattered as they approach. It's not as if these are bad units and you could get a few decent hits, but you can't get devastating hits like that. Match-defining hits. And that isn't going to happen, unfortunately. So yeah, it needs to be a little bit more patient here, Josh, with this catapult. And you can see, getting into loose formation, they should keep doing this route. They should be pretty happy if the catapult continues to utilise its ammunition in that fashion. Meanwhile, another potential problem on the horizon for the dwarves is that if they do surrender this little stairway, they are effectively surrendering high ground to Rune, and then Erebor will have to pull back. There's no way they can allow them to continue to do their thing. Yeah, you can see that. Ooh, right into the middle of the catapult crew there. One of the catapults already falls, and now Tundra's Fox is going to be forced into using his artillery, lest he lose it for nothing. And that would be just the latest in the series of setbacks that we've seen before the dwarves in this battle. I'm not even convinced he has enough infantry really to mount it. I mean, he's got bodyguard units, Terrible Legionary, some crossbows. I mean, he's got a decent little force here, but it's the sort that is always going to be destined for defeat, unfortunately. The Dragon's Breath cannon moving forward. And you can see that the Dragon's Breath taking a loss as well. WK will be wanting to get his cannon into position to try and fire into the catapult. I mean, if nothing else, this is still proving to be a direct hit there and some E-strong crossbowmen. This is still proving to be something which is eating into the catapult ammunition the dwarves have. A direct hit on the broken bombard. This artillery duel continues. Catapult's shooting long significantly now. I think that the Dragon's Breath going now after some of the infantry units, which is pretty interesting. Artillery firing back and forth. Canned Froggy's army now moving in. Some hidden Ironfoot spears. But yeah, this is going to be a real problem, I think, for Erebor, because if they start to get engaged from the sides and then they lose the high ground, they're going to have to remain here, and it's not an advantageous position for them to be in at all. This little pocket of runic resistance, though, maybe getting a little bit too far ahead of itself, going into a decent amount of dwarven infantry. Crossbow support is in here as well. Forward come the Axe Guard of Erebor, who will be able to cleave through the gold-clad runic warriors. Ironfoot halberds will ensure that there is no escape. Carmel's Shadow Guard Rune will still take their toll on the dwarves, but all of the armor piercing and the fact there is a bodyguard tier unit in and amongst it. But what's going on there? Oh, I see, the Hwatcher. I didn't even know they had a Hwatcher. I mean, they're going to get a lot of friendly fire there, and indeed the Watcher does rout the little runic force that was forward there. Perhaps that was the idea. Try and blob the dwarves up. The dwarves are going to take a fair amount of losses here as well, but I mean, it's not a complete victory there, the use of that Watcher. Mevin is probably... I mean, if I were Mevin, I would try and take this high ground at this point. There's only 2 infantry units. Erebor are preoccupied in other parts of the battlefield. Yes, one of them is Dragon Slayers, but they're already a little bit wounded. If you can take this little bit of high ground, you're setting yourself up really well for the rest of the battle, I think. It's just another one of those little things which will make life exceptionally difficult for the dwarves. Meanwhile, a few Axe Guard of Erebor and Ironfoot Spear units getting in here, engaging with the Nomadic Marauders. They'll absolutely butcher Nomadic Marauders in melee. We also have Dragon's Wrath crossbows moving in, however. Not a comprehensive attacking force this, but it's more pressure being put on the dwarves from more angles. And then moving up towards this hill. What is WK going to be doing? He's content to just sort of let Tundra's Rock sit there at the moment, which I think is understandable. Just make sure that he can't move. Put your crossbows in. Disincentivize him from moving off of his hill now that he's decided to go there, and instead help your allies focus on surrounding and destroying what remains of Morris and Josh's army. Point blank shots from the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen into the Erebor legionaries, and that is going to be pretty devastating volleys. You can see there, absolutely eviscerating whole portions of that unit. They are in melee, however, the Dragon's Wrath crossbowmen. They are being engaged by the Axe Guard of Erebor, but already they're racking up an impressive little kill count for themselves. The dwarves hot under the collar. Ironfoot Axe Throwers taking damage from something, and it is Nomadic Marauders. Again, throughout this entire battle we've seen the attackers be the one that really take the initiative in the fight. The dwarves have always been reacting, and reacting quite slowly, I must say, to everything the attackers have been doing. These strong crossbowmen just giving the Dragon Slayers something to fight. I do like the look of the Dragon Slayers. Very good looking unit there. Nomadic Marauders. Again, you can hear the popping of the Watcher, firing almost at point blank. Again, not devastating hits on individual units, but they're spreading out quite a lot of damage across multiple different dwarven units. The Watcher is further in front though. They're going to be engaged by Erebor legionaries. Sapphire Bladesmen doing the business as well though. Yeah, and footmen ready, so they were never really going to be able to achieve too much of anything there. They need to be more decisive here, the dwarves, because rapidly their ability to win this battle is going to be closing. They're committing a lot over here though. Obsidian Guard, more Axe Guard of Erebor, shutting the door firmly shut in Khan's face. They're being decisive over here, but not elsewhere. And that is going to be a good opportunity for Rune and Khan over on the other side to move through this valley and over the stairs. That could be exactly what they're looking for. Another unit of Obsidian Guard as well, eager to use some of their strength now. Gamperim, Eastron crossbows firing away, coming down off the high ground. Well, there's some Ironfoot halberds, which immediately WK is going to take the opportunity to kill off this small dwarven unit. Some hits coming in from the crossbows, but it's only Eastron crossbows and clansmen, so WK won't mind too much if he loses some more of them. Elsewhere, still the cannon. Still some Brotherhood of the Axe, some Storm Guard. That's a worrying unit to still have in the late game. Few units will be as effective against the dwarves as them. Like a catapult shot. I mean, I wouldn't be using the dwarven catapult over here. Your infantry is already in the ascendancy, and if you get friendly fire, again, that would just be more misfortune that the little guys have had inflicted upon them. Right, are we seeing a genuine runic assault on this hill now? I think we are. The Dragon Slayer is starting to take a bit more damage. Ironfoot Warriors over here. They're going to need more dwarves up here if they are to continue to hold on. Now the attackers are sending forward far more in the way of numbers. I'm surprised this didn't happen sooner, if anything. Surely the dwarves have to realise the situation now. Unit 56 halberds is not going to be enough to turn around their fortunes there. And the more that they push up there, of course, the more open to attack they leave themselves to Rune and Cand from the east. Flag Rim are going to be intercepted as they push through by those halberds. The Carmel's chosen back for round 2, having had their world rocked by the Dragon Slayers previously, but now they've come back friends. Things are looking significantly more rosy for the attackers now. Elsewhere, and they're just in time to hear the cannon fire once again. Highborns of Erebor legionaries. And I think the dwarves, they see the problem here. If Tundra's Fox continues to just sort of sit here, his allies are eventually going to be overwhelmed, overrun, destroyed, and then the entire attacking army is going to be knocking on his door, so he needs to do something. He's going to roll forwards and try and make something happen at the very least, but in so doing he will be marching right into the jaws of what is now effectively a runic defence. He's quite fortunate that the crossbows are out of ammunition, otherwise he would be in real trouble doing this, but seeing as they are out of ammo, the quality of the dwarves could well be enough. And yeah, with Axguard of Erebor leading the way, that armour piercing is going to be really, really handy. He's going to need more than just this one unit though. Ironfoot crossbows in position. They're moving forward with everything they have now, but a little bit stretched again. Maybe a little bit indecision plaguing the attackers. Or defenders, I should say now. Hoping to get away with just being able to use a single unit for that purpose. Brotherhood of the Shadows taking a beating at the hands of the Ironfoot axe throwers.
The enemy are badly bloodied. They have lost half their men.
And they're going to do a lot of damage to something on the lighter side, like the Brotherhood of the Shadows. Meanwhile, these Erebor units, some of them shaken in the face of going up against Brotherhood of the Axe and Murad halberds. Not exactly the sort of foe that the dwarves are going to love to fight. And over here, this is where I think the dwarves are ultimately going to come undone, because they don't have enough to guard against both attacks, surely. Yeah, you can see here, once again, Mr. Sneakman pushing forward. In force, Brotherhood of the Axe going up against Highborns of Erebor. Interesting fight that. Highborns are of course a superior unit, but the armour piercing and superior numbers of the Brotherhood of the Axe, who themselves are not exactly weak, surely going to pose something of an issue. Around Stormguard on the way forwards. And there you can see Ironfoot halberds trying to hold back against this attack. Surely it's not going to go well for them. Not entirely sure why the frame rate is taking a dump over here. But once again, it would appear that this runic Candish combination that happened on the east, or joined up on the eastern side of the battlefield, is going to be the one that pushes the dwarves back, and the dominoes should start to fall from there. Mevin doing what he can, putting the pressure on over here. Froggy's forces fared slightly worse, but then a lot of dwarven quality was deployed against him, and even then, a lot of that dwarven quality has been subsequently pulled back. And in the face of that, Froggy has decided to put forward his Brotherhood of the Axe, which could very well be enough to also seal an attacking victory over here. And then there's also the Wind Blades, which could still be used. Only 20 of them remain now, so I would assume that stuff like Axe Throwers have managed to get their fangs into them. Right. Over here, yeah, I'm not surprised that Tundra's Fox is going to be winning over here, now that there's not really any sort of range support that Rune can bring to bear against them. The superior quality of the Dwarven infantry, though they are fighting uphill, should be enough to win this fight. But is it going to be too little too late? I would wonder. Highborns are over here. There's a lot of units around them, including the Dragon's Breath crew, who themselves are a fantastic combatant. Scion Rim, who are very tough. Here comes the catapult. Maybe some point-blank shots is what Tundra's Fox is going to be hoping for. Now the opportunity for the Wind Blades to once again prove to be an annoyance for the dwarves. And there we go again. Axe Guard falling. one of the dwarven generals falls. I feel like I'm repeating myself quite a lot in this battle, but so much of what I'm saying bears repeating because it's been a consistent theme throughout. The dwarves will do very well for themselves if they can win from this position, I think, because I think the attackers have played very well. I think the dwarves have been plagued by a bit of indecision, and the combination of those two things has left the attackers looking pretty good going into the final stages of this fight. Mr. Sneakman moving up this hill. Nothing left really of the dwarves now. Mevon's runic force marching forwards as well. Some Dragon's Wrath guildsmen also on the field today. And there we go. Is that another dwarven general, or is it a runic general? Kind of hard to tell. Neither of those units that were in there were bodyguard units, so could go either way. Froggy victorious as well, turning some of his Brotherhood of the Axe around, presumably to go after what remains of Tundra's army over here, try and help finish him off. A lot of these dwarves now exhausted, however, that is the main effect of fighting uphill. Your fatigue plummets very, very quickly. And these dwarves are going to be absolutely knackered going into the final stage of this fight. 61 Erebor legionaries. Highborns, 63 Dragon Slayer, so it's definitely not a weak force this from Tundra. He could yet prove to be the saviour of his team. WK's force torn asunder. Froggy's going to need to group up his forces a little bit better. They don't want to be making the same mistakes that Erebor made throughout this entire battlefield and not grouping together sufficiently, allowing them a way back in. Bros of the Axe on the way forward. I mean, even then, it's probably not going to be enough to deal with those dwarven bodyguards. The dwarves ultimately can always fall back upon the sheer quality that they have at the higher end of their armies. Murad Stormguard leading the way, cleaning up these Iron for Axe throwers. Brotherhood of the Axe as well, so we're really starting to see quite a lot of the Candish quality making its presence felt across the field. Cheers of victory go up from the men of the east. And the dwarves are going to be digging themselves in back here, so yes, this is going to be the final stand over here. But what do they have left? Halberds, Obsidian Guard, Sons of Durin, a full catapult. Don't know how much ammunition they have left. We've seen a few volleys, not that many, so we should still have decent amounts, but I don't know if they've got enough infantry per se. Blacklocks. They have all the tools to be able to win the fight with that position there. It all kind of depends on the ammunition they have left and also how aggressive the attackers are willing to be, because if they smash the infantry to bits quickly, push forward with sheer mass, I think even the dwarves would crumble in the face of that. Bit of a wild card though is this dwarven force that's over here. What will Tundra's Fox actually do? I mean, it's not a massive army that he has, but he does have units of quality. It's not the sort of thing that the attackers can afford to completely avoid. Catapult crew. I think Tundra's catapult is going to be less of a factor in this battle, certainly, than the full health one that we see in the dwarves' final stand. In fact, I think what we will do, we'll just go up to times 6 speed for now. I don't want him to make a cut because it could be very, very quick. We see things start to get underway. Keeping an eye on that mini-map there, but also up here. Probably bringing enough over here to finish Tundra off. Now we'll go into 1 speed again. Brotherhood of the Shadows trying to use their throwing daggers, and that will lead the dwarves pulling back just a little bit more. 2 units of Brotherhood of the Axe and Storm Guard. Some Camels, Shadow Guard, only 12 of them isn't particularly significant. It would be a really interesting fight this. I think the dwarves would win based on pure martial might, but perhaps with the Brotherhood of the Shadows getting a few volleys with their throwing daggers off, that might be enough to tilt the fight in their favour. to wait and see. Well, something else as well is the crossbows that are still here. Ironfoot crossbows, seeing the Brotherhood of the Shadows, introducing them to the business end of some bolts. Well, Scion Ring, actually the bodyguard unit for Assau, which is a little bit strange. There he is, the Runic General. I do like the model for the Runic General. Looks very impressive. Sapphire Bladesmen moving forward, so it's not as if the attackers are completely out of their interesting tools either. They've still got 2 units of Sapphire Bladesmen. They'd be doing quite well, I think, if they were able to actually deliver their payload of javelins into the dwarves. If the dwarves position themselves correctly, there's no way they should be allowing that to happen. 2 units of Sapphire Bladesmen? No, just the one. The other's Balcloth Tribesmen. Elsewhere, the Hwacha crew, Brotherhood of the Shadows, Storm Guard, Brotherhood of the Axe. Good quality here. Again, are they getting a little bit... It's a little bit too eager from Josh to use his catapult. He needs to wait until the enemy are blocked up. Because honestly, without that catapult getting really good hits into attacking army blobs, they don't win this. And his team as well, his team should know this. I've seen Josh play a few times, but not as much as I've seen Morris and Tundra's Fox play. They should be telling him, don't use your catapult yet. Now is not the time. We need you to perform, and you're not going to be able to do that if you waste all of your ammunition in this fashion. Javelins are also forthcoming into this unit of Axguard of Erebor, which are exposed. Again, it's another misstep here from Erebor. Like, the fact that they still have a good opportunity to win this fight at this point in the battlefield, considering everything that has happened, and yet they're still being a little bit too clumsy for my liking. Tundra is going to move forward, try and take the fight to the enemy a little bit more, which I do think he needs to, because the longer he waits, the more of a footnote he's going to become. And you can actually see that Froggy has gotten a little bit bored with Tundra just sort of sitting in the corner, and he's going to turn around, and instead they're going to focus their efforts on trying to really break the back of this battle once and for all, and destroy the dwarves in this little final stand they have laid on for the enemy. Let's go to times 6 speed. Enough of this dancing around one another. Nomadic Marauders going to use their javelins once again. They've been very good, honestly, at this point in the battle, at using their javelins to good effect, the attackers. Not devastating damage they've done with them, but it does all add up. And the dwarves have not been particularly good at reacting to them either. So it is what it is. So we have Black Engineers perched on their vantage point there, as they continue to take horrid damage. The dwarves, well, not horrid, but again, an opportunity to use the javelins. Otherwise, you know, really, like I said, the dwarves shouldn't really be allowing the enemy at this point to use their javelins in this fashion, based on the defensive position they have. But unfortunately for them, that's exactly what they're doing. These javelins are going up and over defenses. They won't be that effective, but they'll do some damage, and some damage, of course, better than no damage. As we are seeing these Axguard of Erebor, they will be overwhelmed again. A waste of some perfectly good dwarven warriors, really. They weren't really serving any purpose by standing here. What's going on over here? Carmel Shadow Guard getting in the way. They're actually going to perhaps catch a catapult. Highborn's going to turn around and finish them off pretty quickly, though, so nothing too much to concern yourself with. Forward come the Obsidian Guard. Ironfoot Halberds. This is going to be it, really. Last roll of the dice all round. I don't think it's going to be enough for the dwarves, I think. Certainly I'd say the attackers are worthy victors of this battle. I think there's just been too many missteps from the dwarves for me to want them to win at this stage. There is the Hwacha crew. Just going to be in melee. I think they're waiting for their full strength to arrive, and then they will move forth. there. Throwing daggers to good effect. Armor-piercing projectiles once again, softening the dwarves up for the kill. Of course, the Sapphire Bladesmen wielding their two-handed Falx swords. And the dwarves once again pulling back in the face of the enemy there. Iron-foot crossbows can pin them in the back, Sons of Durin. The quality's here for the dwarves. And to be fair to them, the catapult should still have some ammo. So if the attackers do blob up, I would imagine we will see some catapult action. And the wild card that is Tundra's Fox does still give Erebor a decent amount of hope going into these final stages. Obsidian Guard. A few bolts coming in from the attackers actually. Again though, it's not a full blob that. 61 Brotherhood of the Axe are trying to surround the Obsidian Guard. Eventually this is going to take its toll, the Sapphire Bladesmen and Brotherhood of the Axe surrounding them. Yeah, again, it's not completely the moment, I think, for the catapult to be used, but I suppose the thinking could be that if we don't use the catapult now, we might never get to use it, so may as well try and put some pressure on. Tundra himself also needs to be fairly swift, I would suggest. I know that it's not really the dwarves' forte, but I think some speed is going to be required. He's got some Brotherhood of the Shadows up here on the high ground. Going to be using some throwing daggers to soften up the reinforcements from the dwarves that are on the way. Still got some Brotherhood of the Sword over here. The attackers could make the mistake of not committing forward enough to overwhelm the dwarves and allowing the dwarven quality to slowly claw their way back into this battle. I don't know though. There is an interesting bug you sometimes see where for some kill animations you see the dwarves grow back to the size of a normal person, which is always a little bit interesting to behold. Scion Rim. Still those E-Strong crossmen firing across. Another example of the attackers trying to make as good a use of their skirmishers as they possibly can. Also seeing the same from the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen into the final 10k frames. I mean, to be fair, the defenders are apparently still ahead by 1 percentage point. But that does still mean, of course, that the attackers still have a substantial numbers advantage. Perhaps more in the balance than I was giving the battle credit for, but like I said, if the dwarves win, it will be on the back of the sheer quality of their higher tier units, because they have made numerous missteps in this battle. The shadows are ready. Continuing to go after that very battered and bruised unit of Axguard of Erebor, which at this point will certainly lose to the Brotherhood of the Shadows. Here come the reinforcements. This could be the decisive move in the battle. If Erebor are able to make this work for themselves, it could be that the attackers may yet falter. Something has to give here. More decent volleys here, finishing off the Ironfoot Halberds. There goes a Candish General at the hands of the Sons of Durin, a very scary unit to have at full strength here in the late game. They're trying to get to the catapult, clearly, seeing the danger that it represents, but in so doing they may well be killing themselves actually. Trying to push your way through Sons of Durin in this fashion seems like a rather poor idea, and they may be punished for this. It certainly looks as though they are being punished for this. There's still Highborns, there's still Obsidian Guard. Forward come the Brotherhood of the Axe. Again, more armor piercing of decent quality, but they're facing off against the very best the dwarves have to offer. More Brotherhood moving forward, Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen in here. I mean, certainly they'll be able to rip Ironfoot crossbows limb from limb. It's whether or not they can do the same to the bodyguards. Froggy made a decision to bring his units back over here to try and overwhelm the defenders in their final stand. We'll see if that proves to be the right choice now, because he left Tundra alive, and Tundra still has a part to play in this battle as a result. I Highborns are here. It's not a completely terrifying force, this, but it's one that still has the potential to have a very real impact on the outcome of this fight. Whether the axe continuing to fight, Highborns of Erebor being overwhelmed a little bit now. I mean, now is the moment if this catapult can be used. This could prove to be a stroke of genius, though, pushing these Nurad Stormguard right into this catapult crew, because they are butchering the catapult, and the Sons of Durin are scrambling to try and help them. But now would be the moment for the catapult to be used at its most effective. And yeah, they are getting absolutely hammered by the Stormguard. Stormguard themselves actually will do fairly well against the Sons of Durin. The thing is, they're already wounded and out of formation, so the Sons of Durin will be victorious in the extreme, but their catapult crew, I think the dwarves might just get away with it. There goes a runic general. That will have an effect on their morale, to be sure. More Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen on the way forward. Obsidian Guard, Highborns continuing to take damage. Sons of Durin there. The Blacklocks, 21 of them still remain in a decent position. This may be having an impact. It's really hard to measure the impact of skirmishes like this in real time, especially when there's so much vegetation in the way, but I would imagine that this is why the attackers are starting to, well, one of the reasons why the attackers are taking such substantial losses on this front line. I think the catapult crew has actually been completely killed. Either that or they've been retreated. Yeah, they have. 8 of them managing to get away, but that was actually a pretty well executed move there. It just may not be enough. As this battle wears on, that quality is proving to be such a problem. Balkoth Sapphire Bladesmen though, hidden in the side, and as a result they may be able to use their javelins to really good effect. Going after the Highborns of Erebor. This is the thing though, if they were able to commit all of their strength up front, I still think the attackers would be sure to win this, but the fact they still have to deal with this little dwarven force in behind is making life pretty complicated for them. And this is a really intriguing fight even still. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen continue to do their thing. Brotherhood of the Sword arriving on the front line, so still good quality units able to be committed. Brotherhood of the Axe finishing off what remains of the Obsidian Guard over here. The Sons of Durin doing the same, however, to the Scion Rim, really struggling against them. Well, at this stage, the Sons of Durin have finally laid the Storm Guard low, and they will be able to get back onto the front line, and the catapults will be able to remount. Really, really good news for Erebor, that will be. Guildsmen on the way forward. This might be game, set and match though here. They might just have taken too long, which in many ways really does justify that push. Because with the catapults raining down upon them, that may very well, especially with the loss of the generals, been enough to induce some serious routing. But now, the Blacklocks are exposed to what very little remains of the catapult crew is exposed. And those decisive moves from the attackers could well have averted a potential dwarven comeback here. Halberds are still in position, and that's the thing. They still have this little dwarven relief column, but I don't know if it's going to be substantial enough. There goes another dwarven general. Stabbed by a sword of that shape. Doing quite well if you have the physical strength to be able to do that. Here we go. I think this is going to be the end for the dwarves. Ultimately, they gave themselves just a little bit too much to do. Will you crush them, indeed? But yeah, been an intriguing kind of fight, but goes to show how important organisation is. The dwarves never really recovered from their earlier mistakes, and that stands in contrast really to the battle at KIRIKGATHOL, where the dwarves were able to organise themselves quite nicely, do serious damage to the attackers throughout, and even though the attackers always looked like they had a lot of numbers, the dwarves were organised enough to the point where they always had strength they could call upon. to hold the line. And that was not really the case here. Their quality was almost enough to give them the crutch they needed, but in the end, not quite. There's still this little force from Tundra. Erebor Legionaries getting charged still at this stage in the battle. Mr. Sneakman using his wind blades to good effect. They've been a surprisingly effective unit. In a situation like this, it's always going to be a little bit difficult to use cavalry in a siege, especially where the dwarves are concerned, because very often they set themselves up in good defensive shape, but gaps have been found, and he's done well for himself with those wind blades. Yeah, now they're going to go after the catapult. I think it's just a case now of throwing caution to the wind. I think we will go up to ×2 speed, because there's not really too much else to be said other than it's now clean-up duty. Sons of Durin will of course be able to inflict hefty losses on the enemy, but there are simply going to be too many foes for them to deal with. They're still taking throwing daggers at the hands of the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen. Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen themselves are not a terrible melee combatant either. Overwhelming force is the order of the day. Crossbows getting into place, taking up the position the catapult wished it could have taken full advantage of. There goes another Dwarven general. And at this point, the attackers have taken the lead. 2%. Going to be a close one though, again. A really good scenario this. And the dwarves could very well have won in the same fashion that they did at KIRIKGATHOL, but it all matters on organisation. They had the tools, they just weren't quite able to use them at the same level of effectiveness. And also I think the attackers played this very well. They made really good use of their support, they wore the dwarves down. When the time came for them to commit in numbers, they were not afraid to do so. And that ultimately was the big difference maker here. Catapult is running, still Dragon Slayers being engaged here by the Nurad Halberds. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, the Wind Blades are going to be pursuing down, padding their kill count a little bit, but I think they've deserved a little bit of padding, given their effectiveness in this battle. Sons of Durin still over here, still fighting, and they will be victorious against the Dragon's Wrath Guildsmen as well. Strong crossbowmen coming back. They may as well just throw everything into melee and try and overwhelm them. At least give the dwarves that honour. A death in melee. With a unit of 74 Storm Guards still on the field, they don't stand a chance at killing everything the attackers have to offer anyway. Still 55 Sapphire Bladesmen too. As the Dragon Slayers are learning, overwhelming force does work. In come the Wind Blades again. Man, it is warm today. Summer has finally arrived. That is it. Again, I've kind of run out of things to say about this battle at this point. It's just that the dwarves do not die quickly, and that's why there's still over 2,000 frames left, even though they are completely overrun and overwhelmed, getting into the Eastron crossbows, trying to get as many kills as they possibly can against the Easterlings. But the Iron Hills will fall into runic Khans. A little bit too far away from Khans' borders for them to gain anything in terms of territory, though I'm sure Rune will pay them well for their services on the field today. Still fighting. Nothing left over here, so yeah, it is just the Sons of Durin now that remain fighting. Windblades on their way over, 14 of them. They deserve to survive this battle really with how well they've been used, but charging them into sustained melee against the Sons of Durin will probably result in them perishing. Okay, enough of this. ×6 speed it will be. Cummel's Chosen arriving. Scion Rim. And yeah, 2% the difference in the end though. A very close battle indeed, but a well-deserved victory for the attackers. And it's a really nice contrast as well to the last Dwarven siege we saw, where the dwarves were able to rely upon that quality and they ground the victory out. On this occasion though, they just weren't able to do that. Their earlier missteps were just a little bit too much for them to overcome. Plenty of kills though from the dwarves, as perhaps you would expect. Let's see what did the damage for the dwarven armies. 206 kills on the Sons of Durin, all of which came in the late game when the battle had already turned against them really, but a good final stand. Crossbows doing quite well for themselves. Mixed fortunes for many of the units. Again, you need to see some of these units doing a little bit better if you want to win the battle, but X-Guard of Erebor doing nicely with that damage they can chuck out. 117 on the catapult, you need a little bit more in a 5v3 siege. The Erebor Legionaries doing quite well for themselves as well. Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin with 752 kills. We saw this in the last battle as well, with some of the Dwarven infantry getting a ludicrous amount of kills, which they're very capable of doing in a situation like this where they have to hold the line. And yeah, 752 kills on them. 726 kills on Erebor Legionaries, though, is even more impressive because they're not even a bodyguard unit and they lack the armor piercing of the Dragon Slayers as well, so a hugely impressive performance from them. A few others though, Axe Throwers with only 27 is quite poor. 72 as well, so very differing. I mean, they got 10 times the amount of kills as the as this unit, so it's kind of, you see how different units can perform depending on the situation they're thrown into. Ironfoot Warriors of 494 was very good as well, so it's not as if the Dwarven units performed badly. If they had been just a little bit more organised, victory surely would have been forthcoming for them. And finally, Dragon Slayers once again with 569 kills, impressive. 69 for the Highborns only though, again, the juxtaposition, very impressive, underwhelming. If they had just had a few more of their units being not so underwhelming, the Dwarves would have won this surely. Ironfoot Spears doing quite well for themselves, which is good to see. Axe Guard, Erebor Legionaries doing well again though, 60 compared to 489, very different fates. Whatever happened to the Blacklock Engineers? There they are. Yeah, only 198 kills for a body piercing crossbow unit. That isn't enough in this kind of situation, unfortunately. Plenty of standout performances there from the dwarves, but ultimately it wasn't enough to stop the men of the East from conquering the Iron Hills. So yeah, big thank you to DF Morris for making this custom scenario and for allowing me to show it. Long may these continue, because they are pretty much the lifeblood of my channel. They're always the most interesting battles that I show, so hopefully they will always continue. And yeah, big thank you also to all of the players that were a part of this battle replay as well. It takes a big commitment of time to play in these games, more so than it does actually to record them, because of the slight lag that you encounter, the time that it takes to set up as well. So yeah, it's a big commitment in your day to be able to play in these, so big thank you to the players that continue to do that. As for what's coming up next, like I said, I do have a few more sieges that I can do. I'm going to try and make sure that I've got enough recorded so that I can go through my next on-call period, provided it lasts for 3 weeks, which I assume it will, so that I don't sort of have any gaps in my recording. So I think I should have enough for that. And hopefully I'll get sent a few more while I'm on call as well, so that I can continue to do that. I intend to take some time off in sort of late July, early August, and during that time I'll be able to record a little bit more, and that should give me a little bit more margin for error as well. If I do need to reduce temporarily the amount that I'm posting, I will say, but it would probably only be for the odd week here or there, and that's only if I'm working effectively at capacity, which may happen or it may not. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, regardless, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.